Hey, what's up, everybody? I just wanted to please ask everybody sign up to my Patreon, patreon.com, MikeGrib8, just like my Twitter at. It really helps support the podcast, and yeah, I'm really need the help from you guys. I really appreciate everybody who has signed up so far. So thank you so much. So we can keep doing this work on improving scouting and just learning and spreading knowledge about basketball scouting. Really appreciate all the listeners, and if you can't, it's understandable. But if you could, please help me out on Patreon, patreon.com at MikeGrib8. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm writing for Swish, doing a little bit of scouting work for next up. But if anyone
I'll put
wants,
in the description too, so like people like when they see the video.
yeah, and I'm gonna have a piece up hopefully in the next couple weeks about shooting on Swish. It's gonna be, this is giving me a lot of food for thought. Especially like contrasting Jason Tatum specifically with this. I think obviously drafts are so wing hungry. Every team's looking for that like all encompassing wing, the dribble pass shoot archetype and whatnot. And I think having watched as much of the 2024 guys and even this past class, 2023 wings, and all across the spectrum as far as like how well they were regarded, I was really, really blown away with just how skilled Tatum was at that age. And outside of the obvious, like, like willingness and ability to shoot off the dribble, shoot off is just being a versatile shooter and how advanced he was from footwork and ball handling and just seeing and having that comparison point, like a lot of the wings I've been watching recently in this class. And obviously, you don't expect any, at least a lot of the guys I see in 2024, you don't expect them to be Jayson Tatum, but just how refined he was offensively was pretty startling, I'd say.
Yeah, but this is like somewhat what you already like kind of thought as you went into this, like you kind of known this. Like I feel like
Mm,
that's a pretty big what is it called? Like
Selling
narrative
point,
with
yeah.
Tatum, like that's kind of well known and established with Tatum.
Hmm.
Yeah, so this is something that you kind of already coming in. It wasn't like a surprise seeing this, correct? Right?
No, not necessarily a surprise, but I think I would say so much of the narrative I'd been aware of at the time and going into it was I just expected to see a lot of shots, just being a lot of shots being pulled up, and so much of the narrative centered around Tatum. And I think looking at prior at the time like draft coverage and draft scouting reports, I think that there had been a negative connotation with the scoring. So like such a negative connotation with Tatum's scoring and how I feel like he'd been branded almost like pejoratively, like in a negative way, like he's a volume scorer, inefficiency, more of like uh, was anachronistic. Like he was more like a '90s kind of isolation score, whereas most of what I saw, I felt like watching it, these were all quality shots he was creating. Like the level of self creation onto himself, and then especially something I did just because that was a big draft class for me, just something I'd been interested in at the time because of how highly touted so many of those guys were, the Fultzes, the Josh Jacksons, the Lonzo Balls, and something I thought I wanted to see compare my perspective at the time to then, especially kind of a lightning rod of my like opinion was Josh Jackson. And I think he was probably polarizing amongst draft media and probably just people that were doing it on a more casual basis as well. And seeing just things I'm more aware of now, doing more in-depth scouting and see how like I said, just how much more refined Tatum was compared to a guy who I think there was a decent amount of people at the time. I mean, if you can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think a decent amount of people had projected or desired Jackson ahead of Tatum.
Yeah, I think the consensus was higher on Jackson. There was a few people. I think Lonzo was pretty uniformly like it was all
Number
three
two, yeah.
people. But there was like I remember Vicini might have even had Tatum two maybe, but I'm sure he had him at least three. I know he had him above Josh Jackson. So yeah, it was like a
But
thing.
yeah, to kind of shorten it up. I was just surprised by like the shot quality. And as far as I think having that foundation,
What do you mean by
like
shot quality?
seeing just how much space he was able to consistently generate any just from like a variety of play types, like from in pick and roll, how for his age, obviously the caveat for his age, how much nuance there was and how comfortable he was like flowing into just different kinds of shots. I mean, they didn't. He was playing the four at Duke for the most part, and I would say, I mean, he's a 5 star. I don't want. And this might be a little extreme, but I'd say he was kind of marginalized within the offense. I mean, there was a lot of it was a lot of Grayson Allen, a lot of Luke Kennard. I think were the focuses of that offense, and I know he'd had a little bit of injury at the time, and I think specifically college offenses aren't really geared towards the kind of the kind of offense that I think ended up benefiting Tatum, and or the kind of offense that Tatum
Right, right.
benefited from,
Like
the
strives, but
like
then
yeah, developmentally, yeah.
yeah, I agree on that part. But I like maybe because I watched some of the like later season stuff. I watched the two Louisville games, but I watched a decent number of clips, and but it was mostly from like the later season games, and I did feel like they involved them quite a bit and like kind of looked them. But
Yeah, towards like the ACC tournament, like against North Carolina, he saw a good amount of usage. I want to say the Virginia game was one that popped. And
say from like my perspective, like because I'm like trying not to what is it called, like spoil the conclusions, but like what I
hmm
came in with and I feel like was kind of more or less affirmed with watching and going back to him, and is how like you were saying, like how skilled he was, in particular how skilled he is at his size. So I looked at
hmm
he was I think this was even in USA basketball, so he's probably even a little bit longer now, but he was like 8'10" and a half standing reach with USA basketball, I believe. And I actually did a article on Patreon, like I guess what do you call it, article, but it's just like I just did like top 10, 15 players at every position NBA, and I did like their average like wingspan, standing reach, and like basically his are like almost perfect averages for NBA four. So considering that size, and he was like a relatively younger freshman as well, so to have that level of skill and kind of coordination, fluidity at that size, I think is very rare to see, and that's kind of I think why I wasn't at back then. I think I ended up having like 6, 7, 8 on my board, which was obviously low. Looking back, and I think I've already kind of adjusted to this through the years, but definitely like seeing like that thing, that type of skill level, or like those type of abilities and talents that people kind of generally refer to skills, like shooting and footwork and ball handling relative to size. I think is something that I kind of had underrated in the past, and I think is more of a indicator of upside and project like positive projection than I think kind of traditional scouting sometimes gives it credit for. So yeah, I think that's kind of the thing that I definitely like was expecting, and I do think it came to pass. There was a few things I'll get into in a little bit that I think kind of surprised me a little bit, but I think that was kind of the main big takeaway that I thought I would see, and I think that's more or less what I saw. What about with Donovan Mitchell? Or I don't know, do you have more you want to say on this part? We'll get more.
Yeah, I just wanted to build up a little bit off that because I think that's such a good way to put it, like the coordination specifically. And I think so much of what he inevitably turned into is, a high level primary option in the NBA. What wasn't on tape, but giving more credit, and I think you effectively said it, is giving more credit to how much you can extrapolate from coordination at a certain age. And seeing something like, I think the biggest flaw, you could tell me if you disagree, but I think a lot of like easily accessible reads, like whether it be in the pick and roll or even like attacking closeouts, Tatum just wasn't making consistently. And then watching it, I just
Like
to
as a
get the
passer,
full as a passer, as a
Yeah,
passer, as a
yeah.
passer, and then like just anything outside of like pretty rudimentary kickouts, he wasn't doing at that level. And then skipping to now, and I didn't. Well, I'm not going to say I watched every year of Jason, a game from every year Jayson Tatum's been from he was
Right.
17 to now. But looking at, I watched. I think it was just I was watching casually, watching him play a game where he was running like a spread pick and roll, and he throws like a left-handed skip off a live dribble, and it's just they obviously it's been almost a decade since the first data points I'd watched to now, but just like you said, I think like maybe accounting for that more, it's got to get
Yeah,
something to
yeah,
be taken from.
yeah, for sure. I think but I feel like that's at least in our like corner of draft Twitter and stuff. I think we've kind of all like come to more
Mhm.
or less consensus that like stuff like skip passes and kind of these high level like execution passes, but that are fairly like teachable, that are like kind of reads you make in the half court, are like like guys are able to improve that, and you just usually unless it's like some sort of really skilled point guard, most of the time you don't really see that from younger freshmen at level.
I think wait, a better way to phrase it is I think at that age Tatum was at, people had conflated an inability to do so as an unwillingness to make those reads. And I think like recognizing that that was something he was capable of. And I don't know how much longer you want to go on this, but something I've always like interested in because so many of the negatives I've seen in like scouting reports and even like watching it myself, it's like he's looking to score first and foremost. And I wonder how much of that like because so often scoring has a negative connotation, and at least I'd want to say mainstream scouting has so much of it. Immediately the leap is made to microwave scoring. To put an example to it, like Cam Thomas, for example. I don't know how your mileage may vary on how effective a player you think Cam Thomas is, especially in like to a winning basketball team. But I think that's kind of the connotation that usually comes with scorer, that kind of player. And I think recognize it with someone like Tatum, thinking, watching back his tape, and I could see how people could arrive at that conclusion, but I wonder, figuring out so much of Tatum's basketball career prior had been how many instances was the best option not for him to throw a shot, you know?
So
And
in the scouting reports, you had some of them that you had read, to like, call out people, but like there was like kind of this talk because I don't.
oh,
Yeah, go.
oh, definitely. I think there was a skepticism that like his specific like his selling points, like his main traits would be complementary to winning basketball team.
Interesting, yeah. Because from my memory, I feel like there was definitely some concern with that, but I think the thing that I feel like people maybe overlooked is like how like those mid range and like long two type of shots that were pretty difficult contested, like off the dribble, half court, self created looks, how those could translate to becoming a really high level 3 point shooter and deeper range as he gets older. I think that part was kind of maybe at the time not as considered. But as far as him being like overly based on scoring, I think like he was always fairly considered versatile to a degree. He had pretty impressed. Well, I guess yeah. I remember at the time arguing with some people like because I felt he was a pretty good defender for younger freshman at the college level.
I was particularly impressed with. Yeah, I think the defense is pretty impressive.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I will say like some of the like the I remember I had somebody actually liked like a tweet of mine from like 5 years ago randomly like a few days ago about Tatum, where I was saying like how his defense pretty good, but like the issue he had at the college level was like on closeouts he kind of get flat-footed and get blown by sometimes. So that was a little bit of issue, but like as a team defender for a younger freshman, I thought he was quite impressive. And watching the film for this, I came to kind of a similar conclusion on that end. But what do you think of Tatum as a passer right now? Like, do you think he's like very like particularly good
Yeah,
pass?
I think so. I'd say, especially like the decision making burden that's placed on him. I think he's one of the better passers
Okay.
in the league. And it's so much of it because I think I don't want to say we like so many times in big boards I'll see or pieces I'll see related to draft coverage. I think people underestimate they over-index for passing in a vacuum as a skill and don't recognize how like the interplay between scoring and passing and creating those windows is so often predicated on how like potent a scorer the guy is.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I
I
think
agree.
that's yeah, and I think that's particularly interesting with someone like Donovan Mitchell. I think that's someone who
Yeah, let's go to
really
Mitchell for a bit. So yeah, with the same with the Mitchell, like is how like going into this, what did you kind of expect and yeah, just what were your like broad thoughts on Mitchell prior even to actually having watched him right now?
I was expecting to see a lot less refinement as a scorer and as a shooter, to be honest. And I was the athleticism was the first thing I was looking for. I need like obviously he's one of the more nuclear athletes for his position in the NBA, and that's something I thought was going to be turned up even a few notches considering he was younger and considerably smaller. I would say so he was probably a little more like vertically explosive. And the defense was something because it's been such a hot button issue in the NBA. Donovan Mitchell's defense, and obviously, like Jazz had some disappointing playoff exits, and I think so much of that was put on Donovan Mitchell and his defense. So that was something because I remember coming in, that was kind of what was touted, Donovan Mitchell's defense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I was impressed. I like how the switchability, especially comparing. I mean, the motor ran extremely hot. I think that was another thing that like kind of jumped off the tape was how, I mean, it was Patino that was the coach at that time. Like how often they were switching and pressing, and how just consistently effective he was. It especially switching, like how he guard up was something that definitely caught my attention.
Yeah, I actually watching the NBA stuff with Mitchell. I think his defense is pretty good in the stuff I saw. Maybe
I think
like I don't know, like 'cause, yeah, like and I looked. Maybe I need to go back a couple because I didn't watch a ton of NBA like a few years back. So maybe I missed those like seasons where he would have his defensive struggles. But yeah, the stuff I watched for this from the last two seasons, at least, I actually thought he was a pretty solid defender. I mean, I don't know if he's like all NBA defense or anything, but I think he was well above average. I would probably say in this position.
Yeah, I typically agree, and I think and I think it was hyperbolic at the time, and so much of it is, especially with the Jazz team specifically, like how many like it's hard for I think a lot of people to parse one defensive failure on the perimeter amongst like a bunch of subpar perimeter defenders, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but I totally agree. Like with Mitchell, I really kind of remembered him as a guy who wasn't as good of a shooting prospect. And I remember thinking even at the time when he did get on the NBA and how well he shot, that I was like relatively higher on Mitchell than consensus. But I definitely at the time didn't expect his shooting. But now watching back, I don't know, like he
I
shot a
was
ton of threes and he was pretty effective
uh,
in it. I don't know why I wasn't higher on that aspect of his game at the time.
Yeah, and even off his freshman year tape, I don't know. Everyone has such like vastly different philosophies on shooting, and I don't know how else to term it. I lean a little bit more into the mechanics. I think obviously like the aesthetic can be, be different as everyone's like idealized version of a shot, but I think generally consistent shots are you have or the shot is consistent from shot to shot. Compact is something I look for, and obviously like elevation, speed, things amongst just to widen the margins vary you have as a shooter. And Mitchell was I was really surprised by just the degree of difficulty shots he was taking. Even I think his handle was probably the weakest point in his offensive game, but even how comfortable he was taking threes off the dribble was really impressive. And I don't did you see anything take anything differently from the shooting?
Yeah, well, yeah, just to continue on that, like I looked it up, he had a 24 free throw rate as a sophomore, which is like fairly low.
I wanted to get into this. Yeah, this was something.
One thing that I really took away here from watching Mitchell is like how impressive his like start stuff is like acceleration, deceleration, acceleration,
Hmm.
deceleration, that sort of thing that we saw like at the college level and worked really effectively. But yeah, it's an interesting point on the handle. I think for both of them, there's some. But yeah, yeah, go on. What you wanted to talk about something with the free throw
I,
stuff?
yeah. Because I think something you mentioned when we first when you first floated this idea to me was like any like comparing these prospects within your like current like draft philosophy, and I kind of think I would have been lower on Mitchell at the time if I had been because so much of like at least like this I don't know how much stat analysis I do with what's available to me is for guards probably the not definitely the first thing I look towards is free throw rate. I think it's a pretty solid proxy for athleticism and especially like for anyone shorter any guard shorter any ball dominant guard shorter than like 6'5", you're going to want them to be able to like consistently generate paint touches at least ideally barring some nuclear shooting. But Mitchell was small and never got to the line, and I thought that was bizarre when I looked at his BART a while ago, and I thought that was bizarre considering the caliber athlete he was. But then going now having access to the tape and aligning that or comparing that to the tape and kind of realized, and he finished poorly at the rim as well. He was at 55% at the rim on BART. and I think it was like decently unassisted, but still 55% at the rim for an athlete at that level. And thinking, and my hypothesis is it's because the free throw rate was low because the handle was great. I think college context, like college defenses, because you play so much less in transition, it's obviously so less spread out. There's just less spacers. I think it kind of stresses your handle more than in the NBA. I think NBA basketball is just generally a context more conducive to developing a handle. But even Mitchell, I watching his tape, he was one I watched more like progressively, like from Louisville throughout the NBA. The leaps his handle made was some, and handle's always probably one of the things I take into account the most with guards, like with ball dominant guards, and watching his tape in going from Utah and especially Cleveland, the caliber. I think he's one of the best ball handlers in the NBA. I'd say that like pretty comfortably at the moment. I at least like the areas of the floor he's able, and a lot of that's because of how high level and off the dribble shooter he is. But I still think the handle is pretty high up there, and just seeing that development over time from what I would say was a weakness to a strength is interesting. And I think that might be I think that was some explanation for the kind of inconsistent stat profile relative to the athlete he was.
I think my theory was kind of like the length, because he has like that
Yes,
12 inch wingspan, so it kind of gives them like kind of a larger radius to control the ball, kind of makes it more difficult, you know, to
yeah. And not to cut you off, but another thing you mentioned was acceleration, deceleration, and so much of ball handling at like the highest levels is like linked to footwork. And I think it's just much easier for him to get like tight, like really hone in on like precise footwork patterns when you're that like level of that, when you can toggle through speeds like that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's like the big, like the balance he has and how quickly he's able to
Hmm.
gather himself, after like a sudden stop or and then go back into but yeah, I guess like I'm kind of thinking about the statement you made about his handle. Yeah, I definitely see some of the his handle, like how you could say like he's one of the better handlers in the league, but I would say, like I think a lot of the times he's like so like kind of sudden in those start stop. He almost like his mind is almost behind his body, and he kind of
Yeah.
a little bit awkward at times with it, but yeah,
Hmm.
in general, definitely. You know what's to go back a little bit to Tatum? One thing I noticed with him at the college level, first of all, like I thought his handle again at size and age was a little bit better than I expected, because I remember there was a lot of
It
talk about
was.
how much it had improved at the NBA level, and definitely that's the case. But I think it was a little bit unexpected, and in particular, one part of it that I really noticed right now going through the film in college was how much he uses his left hand as a ball handler and like to set up a lot of his moves, and that kind of comfort with the offhand. I think could be another kind of indicator of like hand-eye coordination and just general like skill and yeah, like positive development in the future, just having that ability to be so comfortable at that size with your offhand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was like a foundational piece of, dude. It's funny with Tatum versus Mitchell. I think a lot of Tatum's game is effectively the same. I think a lot of like his comfort moves, the bread and butter, so to say, was present in. I went to the FIBA tape like from when 2015, so he was 17, and like you said, like the left at the hang dribble into the mid range pull up was still very much there, very much comfortable. Obviously, he's extended it out to three by
Right.
now, but that was very much something that was like a part of his game. I think something, and not that you know stray too far from the point you were making with handling and hand eye, but so much of his like I'd say reluctance to embrace contact at the rim and some of the finishing worst we see in the NBA right now, because I think like a lot of Tatum detractors currently I think would probably point to like an over reliance of jump shooting, pull up shooting, and that may be
Yeah, at
initiative
times.
more play.
Yeah.
And that was something I definitely noticed in I don't know, I'd say every level up to now, relative obviously to competition, but and versus Mitchell, I really do feel like I was watching two different players, even from freshman year or not freshman year, rookie year Utah to freshman year Mitchell. And I think Mitchell was also a guy who started playing the game, like who focused on the game later in life, much later than Tatum. He was a baseball player, I want to say,
Okay.
for his first couple years of high school. So I don't know, like
I
the
don't know his
growth.
history that well prior to college, to be honest.
Yeah, I know his dad was a pro baseball player, and but I'm wondering like if you have any theories as to what the growth plate may be as far as those two, because obviously like Tatum's a better player currently, and but I want to say the developmental rate was more drastic with Mitchell than Tatum.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I don't know, like where I think what I always noticed with Mitchell, even like the very little bit I saw of him in high school was like I think I saw him like at some like D list all-star game or something. But he immediately popped like with how like he kind of I think he had a really nice like closeout drive and athletic finish and he like split a pick and roll or something like that. He's great at splitting. So what's it called? Stuff like that. Even back then when he was not nearly as skilled, and I went back to looking at his AU numbers and his shooting numbers was terrible. He's like 65% free throw shooter, like 29 or 28% from threes. And then you see like the increase as um he got into his freshman year, he was like 75% free throw, and then a little bit better. I don't know if he shot that much better on threes, but college to high school jump, of course, and then as a
Yeah,
sophomore.
but no, he was a poor shooter. I don't know what the 3-point attempts per 100 were his sophomore year, but he was double-digit threes and on a decent minute share his freshman year and
Yeah,
shot sub 30%, and then obviously high 30s on a significant like volume and a decent on assist. I want to say he was like sub 80% assisted,
right.
which it's pretty notable.
Yeah, well, I think the freshman year shooting, you could arguably like kind of say that it's a little like smaller sample size as a total.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, definitely there was a lot of improvement there. But I think to me, at least, I would kind of point it to like kind of the natural feel for the game that he has. Like I said, pretty been apparent to me. I remember watching him as a freshman and like thinking this guy, knows how to play and has some upside. And like I said, the very first like some bunk high school all-star game I saw him in, like he popped in that way as well. So I think that's for me, like that's where I would attribute is kind of rapid development improvement is like just that those types of players, in my experience, seem to more often experience those types of arcs. It's kind of like a weird thing that, but I don't know if it will make much sense, but I'll try to explain it out. When I was watching Mitchell, he kind of like his personality, like from my impression, I haven't like dug a ton into his interviews or anything, but he's kind of like not a guy who takes himself super serious. I mean, he's definitely highly competitive and a really hard worker for what I've heard as a player. But you know, I feel like sometimes almost that reflects in his game, where
In what way?
yeah, I like because in the past, like obviously, I'm not a big proponent of like considering personality into like on-court evaluations, but with him, it kind of popped like where it seems almost like he has these kind of airhead moments. Like I don't want to, it just comes off kind of like overly negative because I mean I'm the same way. Like I have a similar like I feel in this sense personality as well, but like it feels like he sometimes kind of. I don't want to say like gets tunnel vision because that kind of implies a lack of passing or something
Or
or like a lack of vision, but that's not exactly what I mean. I mean more so like kind of uh um
like unforced errors, you would say?
not even unforced, more so just he's not always fully engaged and concentrated to the full 100% you know degree that you would hope he'd be. So I think that leads to some of his kind of poor shots that like some of the worst shots that he does take and or some of the possessions that maybe don't end as well for him. So I kind of felt like that was at least from the impression I've gotten of his personality. Like again, I don't know, obviously don't know him personally or anything like that, but just for the little bit that I have seen, and it kind of struck me as interesting. That's something that I've never really considered before, and for some reason just popped into my head with him. But probably not making. Probably need to think this out and like build this theory out a
Yeah,
little more.
flesh it out a little more. Yeah, I guess like I told you, I guess before we started recording, I looked into old scouting profiles just to see kind of what the perception of these guys was. And one of the very first lines written in a pretty prominent draft analyst profile of Mitchell was he's like one of the, I don't know, almost a cliche, like he's gonna build the culture, he's gonna he's incredible intangibles and like the hardworking stuff and all that. And, he's a culture builder and whatever, organization you bring him into. So I thought that was kind of interesting as
Yeah,
far as like
absolutely.
something that had been taken into account on, major websites and, platforms.
Yeah, and Tatum as well. I heard that at the time that like I spoke about like Sammy Senior. I think he might have had him I'm pretty sure he had him number three. I think, but he had him pretty high relatively to the consensus at the time on his own board because he was in the mock draft he was projected to go third because we all knew the Celtics were going to take him. But as far as people's own boards. And like his big thing was, and turned out very correct about this, to rating Tatum over Josh Jackson was like the off court stuff and kind of
Mm,
like
that's interesting.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and I definitely like the personality stuff with Mitchell. I think like there's a lot of positives to having that kind of easygoing personality, and like it allows you to get along with people and like other things, and like so yeah, it's not to say it's like a purely bad thing, but I just just in that particular sense, college reflects to on-court decision making. The impression that I got it, I never really considered that sort of angle before, and for some reason just occurred to me as I was watching Mitchell in particular. So, what do you think of Mitchell as a like passer?
Mm, I it's funny, judging by and it's obviously like almost impossible to fully separate hindsight bias from what you're seeing, but I think at the time I wouldn't have expected passing to be one of, I'd say comparatively to, obviously like he's an extremely high usage player. I wouldn't have expected that to be one of the more like lacking aspects of his, because I thought watching the tape, at least the deliveries he was capable of making, like he would typically make like solid reads and on like a much like more reduced, on ball responsibility. But I thought he had like a decent passing variety. Like he was good about make like I don't think he was. I think he was aware of more reads than he was capable of making due to the handle limitations. But I I think it was generally, and were you asking what do I think of him currently, or what did I think about the tape?
Oh well, both, but yeah, like because like I think we're kind of similar. Thought like that's like one of the things I was kind of actually disappointed by from with Mitchell because like you're saying, I thought his passing was fairly good and like his decision making in particular, he had some pretty impressive like flashes of creativity and stuff. But in the NBA, like the stuff I watched, at least for this, his passing was a little bit disappointing relative to the arc I would expect him to take, and especially considering how much he's improved in other aspects of his game.
And tell me if you think I'm off base with this, but I think a lot of the more impressive reads, now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of the more impressive, quote unquote reads that he's made, I think the windows were made wider just by how like stark the athletic difference was between like the guys he was facing. Like some of the, like now I'm thinking about like a lot of the stuff he would make. It wasn't necessarily like predictive passing, where he's like anticipating a rotation and then making like either a kick out or like a cross court pass, something like that. But
What do
it
you,
was more.
what do you consider predictive passing?
I would say it's hard now. As I said, I think it's like harder to explain. But I think you think of like when guys are, mm, it's like proactive. I would say like you see like, and so often reads are kind of hard lined into whatever like actions they're running. And I think guys, it just kind of like exacerbates, just kind of widens the window for like if it makes the shot, like if you're making I don't know, just like basic, if you're running like a spread pick and roll, and you see, or it's like stack, you're running like a stack pick and roll, and then you see like the low man lift, like it's like you anticipate the tag and you throw it as the low man's like just first rotating over to the roller. I think I
Yeah,
think of that as like, and then that's like pretty, like a pretty basic action, but that's something that immediately would come
Right. No. I agree. I think I genuinely asked the question. I wasn't trying to like I was thinking
Yeah, yeah,
as you were answering. But yeah, I think I agree mostly with that.
yeah.
What
And
was I
I
gonna?
think like the best passers we see are guys that are like able to like doing that like pretty regularly. Even obviously like the reads get more complex as you see different coverages in the NBA, but I think like with Mitchell, at least anecdotally, like I said, there's only so many. I didn't watch all his assists from college, but so much of what I saw was just like him creating like a pretty drastic advantage getting downhill or something, and then hitting the big on like a wraparound pass or a dump off or something like that, or making like a nice like as like the low man's rotating over, like making a nice kick out.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of like the usual that you would see from that age. But I guess, yeah, I
Mm.
mean, yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a huge disappointment, but there is some like looks. I think I posted on Twitter. I was trying to make a different point, but I used the Mitchell clip from his freshman season where he had like a really quick, like swing, to the dunker spot and like early offense, and it was sure. I mean, it was like amazing, like Larry Bird or Magic Johnson or whatever, but
Yeah.
was a pretty good look that you don't see super often from like freshmen and stuff. But I was gonna say, oh yeah, one thing that popped to me as far as I'm a big fan of passing, obviously, like considering like decision making and like quick ball movement and evaluation. I think it's very like positive and useful indicator for projection. But that being said, watching some of these games, like in preparation for this, another thought that kind of popped to me more so, and I've kind of considered this more earlier also when I was watching Darius Garland for another thing a few months ago. It's how in the NBA now everything is so like there's so much kind of everything's so planned and every like play is so like thoroughly dissected and designed that I feel like a passing like just execution and like accuracy and the ability to deliver the ball as opposed to the vision and creativity in itself, which I think has been traditionally a lot more important. Now that the execution aspect of it is becoming more important. Do you think that would you agree with that or not? Really?
That's no, that's really interesting. Yeah, typically because I mean I'm thinking about the guys that are really given the freedom to make more creative passes. I I think the only situation where you would be kind of be enabled or empowered to do so is if you're perceived like the I think what you're kind of saying is, or at least how I'm. You can tell me if I'm misspeaking for you, but I think that there's a more an importance in the execution than the creativity, and like that's like takes precedence. And I think I'd agree with that. Yeah, because if there are, I'm trying to think of guys that I see that will try and make like certain like creative reads, but it isn't like I don't know. It's more like an aesthetic thing than actually like functional.
Yeah, no, that definitely happens. But no, I'm not saying necessarily one is more important than the other, but I think I'm just saying that the accuracy and execution is becoming more and more important than
Oh,
it had been.
okay.
Yeah,
Y- I mean,
or you don't.
yeah, because I think, well, you know what I think it is I think decision making responsibility is kind of more evenly distributed across like teams now. I think more guys are expected to be able to make quick hitting reads. As like spacings become more, it's just become more essential to offenses.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that would go like, well, I agree with that, and that's like, I think that's kind of been at least for a while, big, important.
Emphasis, yeah.
Yeah, like in the just quick decision making in general, I think is just an amazing and really useful indicator for projection. But I think now, I think being kind of accurate and timely, like hitting guys on time, not necessarily quickly or recognizing super fast, but just if like they're moving towards a certain part of the court, getting them in the time where they're moving to the right part and stuff like of the floor, or getting the ball into the right space, being accurate with the passes. But because again, the reason again for this, in my opinion, is because the plays are so scripted and everything is thought out in such a detailed and precise manner, especially in half court situations where you don't have to as much be a free thinker almost, and
Yeah.
you could kind of, as long as you earn like the various reads you could make within an offense. I mean, to obviously to an extent that's always been the case, but I feel like that's more so than ever now. That's becoming like really like they often talk about this in football, how like everything is about like being just like
Yeah.
accurate and on time. So I feel like that's to a much lesser extent, but also in basketball recently has become a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think I'm just trying to think of like the typical like draft Twitter like vocabulary they get to use? Do you think like manipulation gets overrated as like a factor of passing? If that's the
Um,
case?
no, I
Because
don't think so.
do you think I see, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like often when people discuss like people's passing, they say, oh, they're lacking. They don't really like manipulate often on reads, so they kind of ding their passing, or ding or put a cap on a player's ability to pass. And did you think that's unfair, or do you think that's not something that should get valued as heavily?
I mean, I value it, but now that I think about it, like maybe you're right. Maybe it shouldn't be as valued as much because, yeah, like what I was just explaining is guys are just as long as they really learn to read, it's more so about execution. So I'm kind of wondering maybe it isn't as like things like manipulation, isn't as valuable maybe as it had been in the past. But I'm not. I don't think it's like a huge like one thing that was kind of interesting to me is even though he was fairly efficient at the rim, like overall, like on Bart, I think he was like a 63% or something like that at the rim. But I think a lot of the stuff that he did, like off the dribble finishing that I saw, he missed quite a bit of those shots. But I think just the ability to even execute that and like some of the sidestep kind of fluid stuff he had at his size and again size and age uh, was very impressive and not really common to see. So I think that's kind of like just seeing stuff like that. I think not only spoke to his ability to eventually be able to do that stuff, but also develop some other parts of his game like the shot making even from the perimeter and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, at that size, being like a right bank average for power like the four in the NBA, having the like 60 something percent, but it was only 20% assisted rate, I think was pretty impressive. And a lot of, hey, I feel like a lot of the issues, if there was like one athletic deficiency, I would say Tatum had at the moment that I would have probably accounted for, and I see currently in the NBA is maybe like the deceleration, like the very last stride on drives is maybe not is sub elite. I would say obviously he's still very good. He's one of the most efficient players in the NBA, but I wouldn't say it's a massive Achilles heel or anything. But I think a lot of the finishes I saw were he couldn't access, he couldn't really like either decelerate quick enough or like change stride length to get to like the most valuable like the front of the rim. And there were some like obvious like he was young, like kind of a slighter built wing for even for his age, and struggled a little bit like finishing through contact. But that's to be expected. But I think like most of the finishes I saw that were misses or just never really or just in it just bad takes were because like he was maybe 10% or 10-20% off of what you would consider like an optimal driving angle.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. What's it called? What do you think of I just thought of a couple more things that I want to talk about. But what do you think of his like body and like his physique? Like he's kind of a, somewhat unusually built guy, like with the really broad shoulders and kind of thinner waist and mid body. So yeah, do you think there's anything to
Yeah, I think that's pretty ideal for just athletics in general. Like, I think that's like the body type you typically look for is like thinner waist typically means more explosive. You can change directions better, and I would consider Tatum like a very high level athlete, even amongst NBA standards. But I'm thinking of like and we're judging him amongst both of these guys amongst like the uber elite, the tip of the spear guys in the
right?
NBA. Like and I'm thinking about guys who are able to thrive in that area of the court, and that's like, and you can tell me if you think I'm just get diving like too specific. Like I'm what's it called? I'm splitting hairs here, but I think of a guy like SGA who is able to like have such an astronomical free throw rate, who's able to like consistently finish at the rim. And that's a strength versus Tatum, who's relatively weaker at that. I think he is probably the best last step in the NBA on drives. And
Shay?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's something like comparing the two. I think that's like why one area may be, but I wouldn't say like on the whole Tatum's deceleration is poor. He's like I said, he's. I was genuinely I having watched like since then like wings who I would consider like very athletic. Like not to say I'm comparing these two one to one at all, but I think of like Ron Holland in this class.
Hmm.
I don't think anyone would say Ron's a lacking athlete,
Right.
but just the degree of separation Tatum was able to create at the same age is it was stark. It was really impressive. But I think just in that like narrow that narrow like avenue of creation, I think that may have been a cause and currently a cause for kind of like like I all relative to the 10 best players in the world, but some inefficiencies.
I think it's kind of interesting because he's now like a twitchy guy. Like, and I remember at the time kind of being worried a little
Mhm.
bit about some of his like athletic stuff. But like watching back, like I felt like some of his like hip angle stuff, like quickly like changing hip angle, especially but more so in the like you said in the first step, like in the beginning of it, the move was fairly impressive. Yeah. But I do think that the most of the separation is just comes to like keep talking about it is just like the skill level and like the hand eye,
Yeah.
like kind of hand eye and stuff like that. Where and like obviously the amazing footwork and isolation stuff. Interesting stuff that I noticed statistically and just looking back on it. Obviously, I understand like on film where it comes from also somewhat. Um, I believe he was 99th percentile points per possession at Duke from post ups. And
Yeah.
then when you go to the NBA, the last two seasons combined, he's I think both years in the 90th percentile in post up PPP, and it's like I think a total like 1.21 points per possession, two seasons combined, which is incredible from the post ups. But then I watched a lot of these post ups, and it's like really difficult, like 12, 14 foot fadeaway shots a lot of the times with a hand in his face. But he's just like so incredible at those. And I'm surprised they don't run those. Like I feel like this year they started to do it more so, but in the past I feel like like the frequency wasn't as high there. But that is interesting and it kind of again speaks to what you were touching on earlier with him, how he was kind of followed relatively like looking back. Obviously, I probably should have been a lot higher than him looking back. I definitely learned a lot since then, but more or less has followed like a pretty expected arc of development. Like even like the post ups, like he was great at Duke, and he's still incredible at those plays now.
I think so. I'm looking at the outline you sent me, and one question I'm really, especially since as someone who was doing this more in depth at the time, was you. One of the questions you sent was Fultz being seen as a superstar prospect, and even obviously myself doing it from more of a casual place. Fultz was considered tier above, a cut above the rest of the class, almost universally amongst like the draft community and everything. And the second part of this question that you sent me that I think is the most interesting is what did the Celtics get right and see about Tatum versus Fultz? Because it was considered it was headline news at the time that they traded down, you know, and
Right.
that they kind of made their thoughts on Fultz and Tatum obviously like public information. So I'm trying to think of what if you're inserting yourself in the Celtics front office, what do you think like the conversations could have looked like, and what do
Well,
you
I think
think the
definitely all the stuff we're talking about right now, and the
Mhm.
like watching back and you know, well, okay, I'll say yeah. Just watching back and like seeing like the isolation stuff at his like in size and age of what's it called like having the amazing footwork and ability to hit some of those like kind of difficult looks. I think at the time I kind of at least it's hard for me to speak on what others. I think maybe for the mainstream media in general, I think it was more of like the lack of athleticism. I think especially back then, athleticism was still very. I
So
mean,
premium placed on it?
huh?
There's like a premium placed on it. Yeah, it was kind of
Yeah,
the
like yeah, it was pretty. I would say just straight up overrated. Mainstream draft media. Even to this day, I would say that, but like definitely back then more so, and I think that kind of I think kept them lower. But yeah, for me personally, I think not realizing how translatable that level of skill level and kind of coordination and fluidity and stuff like that is and how that's a much bigger upside indicator than I think I had realized, and a lot of people still realize. you know, overall. So I think the Celtics kind of had recognized that ability to make these like kind of difficult shots or create space out of pretty much nothing in the half court situations and one-on-one situations and the incredible touch and all that stuff and kind of felt pretty comfortable. But I think definitely a big part of it is also the Celtics are obviously very strong franchise and have a very good program with like training, coaching in place, and I think being there in that spot and the team they build around him and next to him, I think that absolutely been a big help as well to getting the most out of him.
What do you think? Like it, I guess not saying you want to dive in. We want to dive into like the Markel Fultz, scouting profile. But what do you think that could have been the separation or the differentiating factors between the two?
Well, I mean, Fultz I think is just like a crazy, like like the shooting stuff pre-draft and all the injuries.
Yeah, his career since then is so just abnormal. It's almost impossible to say because it was such it's almost impossible to properly rate the decision in a vacuum because of like what happened to Fultz, like totally out of his and anyone else's control. But
Yeah, the one thing I'd say about Fultz is I think at the time we probably overrated his shooting because he had the lower free throw percentage, and I even remember watching some of his shot mechanics and kind of being like, I don't know, like he kind of from range he kind of had to what's the word
strain a little bit.
strain himself a bit, yeah, and like I kind of wondered about that if like I'm always usually fairly optimistic about guys getting stronger and older and being able to expand their range. Tatum was a good example of that, but yeah, with Fultz, I felt like maybe it was even beyond that, maybe a little bit, but I kind of because he was so good in the mid range and like these difficult out the dribble looks in his 1 year in college, we probably should have realized that was more, kind of given more credence to that could be small sample size, kind of looked at the free throw percentage more. At least for me personally, I think these are the things that I kind of had overlooked with Fultz at the time that could have actually been predictable. Obviously the other stuff is just.
Do you think there's something too with like the shooting? It obviously, injury since then has completely like warped the shooting projection, but some of that could have been being a smaller player with a two motion shot because he was elite from mid range and I don't know he was great in that one season from three, but
Yeah,
it could possibly been a struggle just being smaller.
yeah, absolutely. I think the strain like stuff is I think comes more from like the two motion and kind of what is called depending on like elbows a lot and it's kind of gives more difficulty. It is interesting like with Tatum. One thing I noticed in the NBA is he's almost better as a shooter when he's kind of going quicker into the shot off the dribble as opposed to when he's kind of taking his time and is a little bit more deliberate, at least in off the dribble situations because in those kind of quicker situation, he's able to go to the dip and like right into, like it's kind of a more single motion release with him in those. And at least again, this is very small sample size. It's like a few games and some clips that I watched. So it could be just, more coincidence. It's kind of a bias or something on my part. But at least what I watched, I felt like he was almost, more efficient in those types of situations off the dribble.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting. I was expecting his off the dribble shooting numbers to be much better in college than they were. They were pretty mediocre to subpar, honestly. Like especially from two, I was expecting the 2 point off the dribble numbers to be better. I think he was like high twenties,
Yeah, I think it
but
was like 31 or something. But yeah, it wasn't
yeah,
yeah. Absolutely.
yeah,
But just yeah, like that's where it goes to like volume is very important and yeah, definitely for shooting I think yeah. I mean, do you think Tatum is like a quote unquote superstar? Do you think he's like the type of player that we typically think as a number one option for a championship team? Or do you, I mean, I would presume you think he's the best player in the Celtics, right? And Celtics are a contender in that and stuff like that.
yeah. I would think pretty comfortably superstar. I mean, I just think any player you can credibly look at as like a number one option on the title contending team. He's, meets that qualification, and
Oh.
I would consider it. Yeah, I mean, I think. I feel like Superstar is just like one of
Are
those
you
like
super like married to what you just said? Because I don't. I think I feel like I don't want to like get into this right now because we're already running like 2 hours. But I feel like that's not exactly correct. But I think maybe you're just meaning like broadly speaking, like not 100%, right?
100% as far as like number one option in
Like
the title
any
contender
guy
thing.
who's the number one option for a championship contender is like a sweep.
Yeah, as I said, that was probably a little passing. Because so many like title contenders is like I don't know, kind of a wider term that you could include like a lot of like I guess you could technically call I don't know who's the Cavaliers or the second seed in the East. People could call them a title contender this year. I would disagree, but I would say a
But no, I'm talking more from like the
yeah.
player themselves. Like a guy could be like the top guy.
From the play.
Yeah, like the
Yeah,
could
yeah.
be like a top
I
option,
would
but he's not
I
their
would
best
definitely say so.
player, or he could it could be a guy who's is their best player, but they could do you that and that's the question I really was getting at is like, can you build like a viable championship contender? You're
With
now
Jayson
without
Tatum.
having like a top 5, 7 player in the league, which I don't think quite Tatum's there, but maybe you disagree.
I seven, I would say so. Five, probably not. But do I think? Hey, yeah. If the question is, could you? I think you bring build a title contender around Jason Tatum. I think it's like pretty comfortably yes. And I mean, even if you look at like so much of what we're doing is discussing and projecting based on age. And I think people frequently forget just because of how he's been in the league is 8 years, almost a decade. He's still only 26. Like I still think there's development to be had, improvements to
That's
be
a fair
made,
point. Yeah.
and to have already like been so close to reaching the precipice. I mean, they were 2 games away from winning a title 2 years ago. So yeah, I would say Jason Tatum definitely is meets that threshold.
Because
And
like
you know how something I'd had a thought in passing when we mentioned Fultz and how we can't really like there's so many like caveats on Markel Fultz's career because of the injuries and whatnot. But it would sound ridiculous to say even if his even the caliber season he had as a prospect and had removing all the injuries, it would be kind of ridiculous to say you expected him to be better than Tatum.
wait,
Does that make sense?
removing all the
Like it,
injuries. Go ahead.
yeah, if you think like, oh, if Markel Fultz had you not ran into all the pitfalls he had as a prospect, you think there's a world where Tatum wouldn't be the number one player in the class? No, I don't think it would.
Yeah, but that's because like yeah, Fultz's median outcome even without the injuries is lower than Tatum was like pretty much like an upside outcome to hit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like if you like, I think it would be fair to say that without the injuries, considering Fultz's like ceiling outcomes, there's probably like some ceiling outcomes that could be even better than.
Oh, okay. That's what I was. That's I guess that's more the point I was trying to make is even the 99% out 99 percentile outcome Fultz. I don't know if I'd necessarily. I think it'd
I think
still be kind of.
it'd probably be on par. It's
You
probably
think
like
so?
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, he was very high level prospect at the time. I mean, probably we overrated him somewhat, like with some of the things, but
I guess more
I'd
the
have to go
question is
back
like
and like watch him and
would you bet on it being likely? I think it's like if
well, yeah,
someone
that's what I'm
were
saying. Median outcome,
assuming.
of course not. I wouldn't say that
Uh,
because like Tatum hit like this crazy high end, like this is probably his 90th percentile or something outcome or something like that. But yeah, like median outcome, I definitely don't think Fultz would be this good. But some like high level, like I'm not gonna say like obviously anybody could become Michael Jordan. I could grow tomorrow to 7'5", who knows? But like outside of like unreal, like realistically speaking, but very high upside outcomes, I think Fultz probably could technically without all the injuries and everything could have maybe been on par of that player.
that's interesting. I like I said, we're wrapping up, but I kind of I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that, but I also wasn't as you know as fully invested in like the Fultz
Yeah, and I'd
draft
have to go back and watch
profiling
Fultz
and
now because I was an
uh,
idiot. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. That was like my really taking this serious. So yeah, like maybe I was just way off on Fultz and I was just being a dumbass. So but yeah, but from what I remember and like just the stats I remember and stuff like that, like I think there's a chance like if you really look at high, and but yeah, what I wanted to just like before we go yeah, like I was kind of like thinking about the dichotomy of like this is what I heard, something I heard on the Nate Duncan show like a while back, and how he was talking about like how championship contenders, like very, majority, overwhelming majority of them are going to be built with like really the best player, one of the best players in the league, one of the 3, 5, 7 best players in the league at the helm, and like especially in playoff series, is in my anecdotal at least experience is somewhat true. Like usually the team with the best player is the team that wins the playoff series. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you come up with exceptions, but more or less, like you even see like when LeBron was like 21 or something like that, and he took this team to the conference finals as like a 6 seed, and like situations like that, just because of how he was like this incredible individual talent, and in the playoffs that becomes such a huge deal. But the other kind of perspective on this is like you could build championship teams just by getting the best guys you can, even if they're not like high level, if you're just very good at recognizing talents and picking out like individual like really good players. And like the examples of these would be like some of the Spurs teams that have won the championships, with like when Kawhi was a little bit younger and Tony Parker and Duncan were older, but they had all these great pieces that fit really well together, and they recognized all this talent really well. Or like the team like the Pistons from, I mean, obviously generally in NBA history, it's going to be the superstars that win the titles. But do you think it's like a realistic, viable strategy to building a team from that perspective? Because I feel like building a championship contender from superstar, most of the time the superstar, either you're just like a Jokic where nobody knew this was coming, you just got hella lucky, or it's like a LeBron where everybody knows, and it's just whoever wins the lottery that year, like, or whoever he decides to sign with the Lakers or whoever. Like you don't really choose. It's not like a GM is good for signing LeBron. Congratulations. So like yeah, like do you think basically like do you think how much luck is there to building championship contenders, and how realistic is it to building championship contenders just through being able to identify talent and so forth?
Mm, I think a good amount of it's luck, obviously. Like I like you bring up the Kawhi teams. Like Kawhi was, if I recall, he was technically picked by the Pacers, you know, and they just hang on to him. They have Kawhi, Paul George at 19 and 20 respectively. But I think so. I think you do need more than likely. I'd say more than likely you need the best player. And I think that is like the much more consistent, like historically proven, and just like personally believe that is the much more consistent route to building a championship contender team. But are you asking like that versus like kind of on aggregate having the best collection of players,
Well,
like those two?
yeah, kind of that, and also yeah, like just like how realistic is it really to get the best players in the league with by being like a good executive? Like it seems like most of the time this happens through like basically luck, chance, like circumstance, that sort of thing.
I still think it like relies heavily on outside of like I honestly think like the LeBron situation, like to him winning his first titles is less likely. Like I think that is more luck involved, just as far as like the contracts aligning, like LeBron being able to be moved to Miami and having finding a collection of guys that like are willing to take less. I think more the I think it relies heavily on the front office, because not only do you need to like get lucky with I guess getting the best player, but recognizing the kind of context that would best like accentuate their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. Does that make sense? Like if, for example, like you bring up like a Jokic, for example, and you said it was because of like Nate Duncan. Not to throw, I think Duncan does good stuff, but him specifically was someone I remember being like vehemently opposed to the idea of Jokic being the best player on a title contender, because the rim protection. It's like you've never
Right,
had a
right, right.
team
That's true. That's true. Yes.
win the title because of like rim protection. But then you pair one of the best passers ever, a guy specifically that can like score at a ridiculously high clip and play make in the middle of the floor with a ridiculously high clip, with the like the level of like off the dribble shooter Jamal Murray is, and that's just like a nuclear offense, you know. And then you have guys that can like supplement them, like you have like Michael Porter Jr.'s shooting, and like Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon, like two front court guys that can like defend at a high level and can play off of like a middle of the floor playmaker like Jokic. And then the most obvious example being like Steph Curry, for example, and like how uh what's it called, like how synchronized like all those like synchronized isn't the word I'm looking for, but like just how well aligned all those skill sets were in Golden State. Where, because that's the thing, I think shooting itself, we talk so much about it, but like shooting itself is like a force multiplier. It's like you have a guy that can shoot, even the best shooter ever. Obviously, you're never gonna like. that's something like going into the shooting I've recognized is just how far an outlier Steph is. It's kind of crazy. I think it's like the least projectable. Like we're never, it's the more I look into shooting like profiles, the more confident I'm like we're not going to see something like that again for a very long time. But anyway, but like you have someone that's like that caliber and off the dribble shooter, and then you put him next to a guy who can shoot off of like a variety of movements, but I mean, is also just like a very versatile shooter unto itself. And you get just like I truly believe like that, like the Golden State Warriors are like training wheels for prospects because of the spacing. Like you think of like a Jonathan Kuminga. I still don't know if Jonathan Kuminga ends, and it took a while. I don't know if Jonathan Kuminga ends up being what I would say is like I think most people, if knowing how he developed would have been, and that was a pretty polarizing pick amongst draft Twitter and amongst like just general population. I think like I think they're, but I think if knowing how he developed even like a few years into his career, I think people would be comfortable with Kuminga going top 10 in that class. And I think that's like because of the context he's thrown in, and not saying that Kuminga like makes them a title contending team or anything. But I'm saying like that's such like a ridiculous context to just like that makes the Golden State just a very fertile ground for development. I think. Like I think like I'm like Drain like because of the spacing, because of like the kind of offensive I don't know, the lack of worry you have with those two guys, it makes someone like Draymond's development a lot more consistent and the path a lot clearer, you know, for someone like that being more viable. And yeah, so I think it will like that's kind of a non-answer, but I think it will like you need some luck to get those like generational talents, but once you have like guys that you're comfortable become like making the context of your team, then I think the team building becomes very dependent on the front office, like A, recognizing and B, capitalizing.
Yeah. I think what I've pointed out before is like always back in the day, a lot of people would talk about how it's like only one team wins the championship and it's championship or nothing, and that like we're all like trying to build a championship team. But I felt like I said, because of the so much of the luck element is involved, I feel like it's better like to just focus on building a contender. I think that's more
Yeah, I
realistic
would.
goal and the like kind of more something that's based on like the skill, quote unquote, of the front office and the scouting and so forth. And like really, and then from there, once you build up a contender, hopefully you get lucky and you able to take next step.
I know we're rounding down, but this is something I like. This just made me think of something I've thought of a decent bit. Is I think as the talent pool has gotten deeper in the NBA, which I know some people don't disagree with that, but I would say the talent pool has gotten a decent bit
I agree,
deeper over the years, and I
definitely.
think you can see, yeah, and I think I follow football a lot, like American football for the international listeners you may have, but and the what you described as like being a successful team, like perennial contender, that's the mark of success in football because there's a lot of randomness involved. And I think actually like contrarily to like as the talent pool's gotten deeper in the NBA, and we've seen it over the past couple of years, like so many titles in the past couple of years have been swung on injuries. Like yeah, I think you could make an argument for the past like 4 or 5 championships have been just completely swung on an injury. And I think like being able to capitalize on that is having like a roster that is a contender. And I think being a perennial contender as the talent pool's kind of gotten as deep is gonna like more often than not like that's the mark of a success. And you may be able to get. I think it's gonna be a while until. I mean, who knows? Maybe Wemby will be the goat, and they'll get
Yeah, I
someone
was
next
about
to
to
him.
say, do you think we're gonna
Yeah,
see like an era of like no what is it called? What are they called?
parity.
Dynasty?
I think we're gonna
Yeah, no dynasty.
say. I kind of I would believe so. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I'm.
probably Wemby, if anybody, is going to be the next dynasty if they build a good like team around him and everything to get some good players there, and he develops as we hope, we hope and think he will. Yeah, that if anybody, that'll probably be the next dynasty. Maybe like a Flag or Cam or one of those guys, will end up hitting a really high outcome and they'll be competing with him. But yeah, yeah, I agree. It does seem like some of the rules they've made to the CBA recently, and some of the
I
like
was just about to mention that. Yeah.
yeah, some of the like kind of weird things that happened with the CBA because of that boom, and then then it went back down, if I remember correctly, or something like that, or it stopped progressing as much as it's supposed to, or something like that, because all that stuff put together and kind of yeah, I think there's more like you said parity, and like there's not going to be as much dynasty at least in the coming seasons, and I do also think right now we don't have like that guy. Maybe like you said, Wemby is probably the next guy, but
But I
outside.
think funny enough, Wemby is going to fall into like it very well could fall into like the early LeBron trap where his teams were he was too